that our panel has given up their time and their experience to share with us in this important topic on older people in the workforce. We have with us, we're very fortunate to have with us David Sinclair, who's the Chief Executive of the International Longevity Centre UK. We have Colin Huffen, who's the Head of Workforce Policy and External Affairs with CIMSPA. Helen Horton, the Account Director from Love Recruitment, and Helen Tite, the Managing Director of iCareiMove. So I'd like to, as well as welcoming you to the webinar, I'd like to welcome our four distinguished panelists, and thank you very much again for giving up your time for this. Could I please just ask you, before we go into the subject of the webinar, for each of our panelists to give a brief introduction to your organisations, because it's important for us to know where your experiences come from and your focus point. So if I just on the order of my screen, could I ask Helen Tite just to give us a brief introduction to your organisation that you're representing today?
Hello, and thank you for inviting me here. I'm Helen Tite from iCareiMove. iCareiMove focuses on two aspects. Firstly, workplace wellbeing, and that's actually coming from a physiological point of view rather than a gender point of view, addressing the fact that we are all getting older, and particularly female and women's health. We are addressing midlife and beyond and what that looks like. The other end of our spectrum addresses training, but the oldest adults. We work in falls prevention and what that looks like beyond care, outside of health, supporting people to live longer better.
Thanks very much, Helen. And now to Helen Horton from Love Recruitment.
Hi, Helen Horton, Hels, people call me. I work for Love Recruitment. So Love Recruitment are a specialist fitness and leisure industry recruitment service. So we support businesses in the health and fitness and leisure sector. We also have a sister company called Love Care Recruitment, and they specialise in wraparound care in the after school sector, looking at that care sector as well.
Thanks, Hels. Am I all right to use your friendly name?
Can do. Yes, that distinguishes us then.
It does, yes. Yeah, thank you. Colin Huffen from CIMSPA.
Thanks, David. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Colin from CIMSPA, so the long version, the Chartered Institute for the Management of Sport and Physical Activity. That's why we abbreviate it. So we're the people organisation, so we're here for you. We are a professional body. We provide people with professional recognition for the work that they do. So we're really interested in the workforce element to this and how older people can be retained as members of the workforce, but also can be recruited as a second career and career change opportunities as well.
Thanks, Colin. You'll notice that I left the long name to you to tell everyone. And finally, last but not least, David Sinclair from the International Longevity Centre UK.
Great, thanks, David. So I'm David Sinclair from ILC in the UK. We are the leading authority on the impact of longevity on society, and essentially we combine evidence and solutions and networks to try and make change happen. And we, I suppose, exist to help governments, policymakers, businesses, and people like you around the table develop solutions to help us all live healthier and happier and more fulfilling long lives.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, David, and thank you to all of you. You can see, members of the audience, what a distinguished panel we have. So we're very lucky to be able to discuss this topic with them and to hear from their experience. So I'll just give you an introduction to the webinar. So we will be discussing the value of the older workforce. In a recent House of Lords debate, Baroness Ros Altman describes that since the pandemic started, so that's since December 2019, the indications are that the employment rate for those aged between 50 and 64 fell from 72.7% to just 70.9%. So that was reversing a long-term trend. And to put that into context with the numbers of vacancies, so in October to December 2022, there were 1.2 million vacancies, which is a decrease of 75,000 from July to September 2022. So that shows you that despite the fact that there's a decrease in vacancies, it's still putting pressure on the workforce, and we're wondering why the workforce, the older workforce, is finding it harder to come back. So that's just putting the topic into perspective. Could I please just ask if anybody's got their microphones on where they're not speaking, just to turn them off, myself included, because I'm getting feedback. I don't know if other members of the audience are. Thank you. That solved it straight away. Brilliant. So my first question is to David Sinclair, the Chief Executive of the ILC UK. So David, just after my introduction, Baroness Altman, she further points out that the National Institute of Economic and Social Research showed that people retiring just 1 year later than previously can add 1 percentage point to economic growth each year. However, if more older people pull out of employment altogether, this source of economic growth disappears. The economic activity will remain permanently lower, and the pension savings of those who are no longer working will be unable to last as long. And I just wondered what your take on this was, David.
Yeah, thanks. I think, context, of course, is that there are an increasing number of older workers in the economy, but that's driven partly by the fact there are more older people, and partly by the fact that you've seen a huge increase in the number of women at work over the last sort of 20 or 30 years. Actually, if you look back to the 1960s, you've got a very similar proportion of men working at 65 than they did then, and then you did in the 1960s. So you've seen very, very little progress in some ways. There is, as Baroness Altman says, though, there's actually a quadruple financial benefit for individuals of working just a little bit longer. So if you work a year longer, you save for 1 more year, so you can build up more money. You benefit from another year of compound interest. You start drawing down your pension later, and you have your savings to last a year less. So there's and actually those 4 things add up to actually a huge increase in retirement income. So 1 year is not just, it has sort of this quadruple benefit, really. And also, of course, we know that good work is good for us. We know having purpose, having meaningful occupation is really good for us as we age. It's important for all of us to have purpose. However, it's still the case we've got 1 million people between 50 and state pension age who aren't working, and ill health and caring responsibilities are the biggest issues. One thing we might want to talk about later is the flexible working bills just gone through today, which may have a significant opportunity, means you can demand flexible working from your first day. So there's some opportunities there. But actually, as Baroness Altman highlights, there's a macro opportunity as well. We've just launched this new prevention index that shows we in the UK work for about 30 years of our life on average, and the challenge there is, frankly, we can't sustain an 80 or 100-year life based on 30 years worth of work. So we're going to have to work a bit longer, whether that's working more under 65 or over 65. So and if we get that right, if we can find a way of increasing, not getting everyone to work 40 or 50 years, but just getting everyone to just work a couple more years, it will make a huge difference to the economy and to individuals.
Thank you, David. That's really interesting. I'm interested in the prevention index as well. I attended the launch of that online. Was it last month? And I was just curious to know whether how employment life scale span fits in with the prevention index, and where does the UK sit in comparison with the rest of the world?
So you can all have a look. It's at preventionindex.org. The UK. Europe as a whole does pretty badly, really badly. Places like Italy, places like Belgium, places like France work for very, very low number of years during their lives. So very significant challenges from an economic point of view. UK does a little bit better, but we're worse than Scandinavia. I think we can get the UK from our sort of 33 years, which is not a huge job. Actually, that would make a huge difference at an individual and a societal level. So the UK is not in the worst place, but actually way down on some countries where people work for 40 plus years.
Thank you very much, David. I will come back to, I'm glad you mentioned the flexible working bill, because I have a question once later that I think fits in with that really nicely. So thanks very much for that for that contribution. Just to remind everyone that if you have comments or questions you'd like to ask, please do put them in the chat function, and we will put them to the panel later. Does any of the other panelists have any comments to make after David's response? It was a very good response. I really enjoyed it. I'll move on to Colin. So thanks for joining us, Colin. So as the professional development body for the UK's sport and physical activity sector, you must be looking at the changing demographic profile of the UK, the needs for the sector, and how the workforce reflects memberships as well, memberships of leisure centres.
Yeah, definitely, David. So we have invested quite a lot of time and effort into understanding who the workforce are and their demographics and where they operate. So we issued a survey in 2019, which was the State of the Nation report in terms of our workforce, which said that 585,000 people work in the sport and physical activity sector. We've recently done a comparative report this year, which we're about to publish in September. So in the early findings of that, what we found is the sector has pretty much remained stagnated in terms of there are 588,000, so 3,000 additional members of the workforce since 2019, which in some ways is positive. We were expecting a bit of a dip post-pandemic, and we did see a dip, but we've returned recently to pre-pandemic levels. So by the efforts of our employers to get people back into work and the efforts of our sponsors and government supported with that as well, with investment and funding. However, what we found is in terms of the demographics of the workforce, that's shifted what we perceive as negatively as well. So we have an even less diverse workforce than we had in 2019 in terms of age and gender demographics as a result, because anecdotally, I think employers would tell us, we speak to them every day about this, they have been less focused on the types of people that they can get into the building, but they've been focused on getting people into the building to keep it operating. So the levels of qualification are also lower than they were pre-pandemic as well. So on average, 30% of all jobs in the sector are held by 16 to 24-year-old males, which I'm sure you can see in Pendle Leisure Centre and any other centre that you attend as well. However, there are some interesting other trends in terms of different job roles and opportunities as well. So the female fitness instructors, particularly female and older person dominated. So those that are delivering group exercise instruction. The biggest group in that category are aged between 45 and 54, but that drops off massively after 54 and drops off to almost nothing after 65 as well. So there's some definite opportunities for us if we've got a large workforce who are already aging, and to retain people within the sector as well. So there are a few challenges for us, if you like, as a sector, and there are a few things which we as a professional body obviously are hoping to help with. I think understanding who's doing what where is a good place to start, and it's the first time really we've had that kind of detailed picture of where people are operating as well, and the demographics of that. If we don't know who they are and where they are, then how are we supposed to do anything about understanding whether there is a problem, and then how we can help solve that as well. So we're in a much better place with that right now.
Thanks. And how that's really interesting, Colin. How does that fit in with, say, for example, Helen Horton's work as a recruiter in the sector? How do your two the sort of the needs and the solutions, which I think Helen's providing, how do they fit together in that way?
Yeah, I think we're becoming much more mature as a sector in the way that we work with our workforce. I would say this, but we're having a professional body. So we've operated as a sector which hasn't had a professional body until very recently. CIMSPA has only really started to work significantly in the sector since about 2015, 2016, which is obviously very different to a lot of other sectors who have got well-established professional bodies, in some cases for hundreds of years, not just a few. So I think we've got a lot to do. I think we've got there's a lot we could learn from other sectors in the way that they operate as well. In the way that we value our people, in the way that we care for our people, in the way that they recognise the opportunities and where their skills can be used within our sector as well. I think if you were to ask me, and anybody in this call or anybody I've ever met in the sector, what careers advice and guidance you used as a young person or even as a career changer when you were looking to change career, and did anybody ever speak to you about our sector? and working in our sector, and did they give you a clear and accurate picture of all the job opportunities and the roles and responsibilities and the value proposition that might sit behind that? I think we would all have the same answer, that no. And where would you turn for that? I'm not sure I currently have the answer, but we think that's something we can help with as a professional body. So we've recently been given investment from Sport England to look at that more deeply as well. So their Uniting the Movement strategy has obviously got a key theme of equity, diversity, inclusion, of which one of obviously is in making sure the workforce is representative of society as a whole. So we will be investing more into the basics of understanding what the careers are in our sector and how you access them and what the training is and where you can go do that easily. Because I'm not sure where you'd start if you're an older person thinking, you know what, I'd like to get a job in the sport and physical activity sector. Like, where would you turn? You'd probably turn to your local leisure centre, I'd imagine. But is that going to be a true reflection of all the jobs out there? We know that a lot of people don't just work in leisure centres. The sector's broad and it's vast and it works in community sport. And there are hundreds of thousands of opportunities available. And one of the things we want to shift is a perception of our sector of being a low pay, low skill sector as well. So we come across that quite often, and it's quite annoying. Actually, when you look at the opportunities that are available, when you look at all the different job roles that are available in our sector, pay terms and conditions, yes, are comparable to other service sectors, which are generally lower paid than managerial and administrative sectors. But there's lots of value that our sector offers to people that, in terms of work-life balance and flexibility, that other sectors can't as well. And so what we're seeing is we're going to do a little bit more work in understanding personas. So what do people really want from working in our sector? So if you are exploring a new career, what would you want to know? Where would you want to access it? And how would you best like to access it as well? So that's some of the work we're going to do to hopefully make it more attractive to work in our sector as an older person as well. Provide the information both nationally and locally for people to understand what the opportunities are.
That's fascinating, Colin. And I saw Helen Horton and Helen Tite both nodding vigorously at this. And I imagine that we need to link this up, don't we? We need to link up the work that Colin's doing at CIMSPA with what Helen's doing in recruitment, Helen Horton, and also I think with Helen Tite's work with workforce well-being as well. That's critically important. And then through David's work on policy, we need to raise the profile, because people in the leisure sector, and this webinar is not all about the leisure sector, but people in the leisure sector it's critical that we get it becomes a respected workforce, because as I remember at a UK Active event, Sir Simon Stevens, who was then the chief executive of the NHS, looked at the audience and said, "You are the front line of the NHS." So it's absolutely critical that we get this right, that everything that Colin's just said has to come to fruition, but we need to link it together. So I'd like to bring both Helens in, but just first to turn to Helen Horton to ask what your thoughts about linking up what Colin's just said with that recruitment drive and the need to have sports and leisure professionals as respected, literally health professionals.
Yeah, definitely. And I completely, agree with everything that Colin said. I think a lot of it is that linking up, more discussions like this, more people coming together. I think across our sector, there is sadly perhaps some, adversity to recruiting older adults in our sector. I think there are sectors that do that better. There's been research that suggests that kind of only 42% of hiring managers would look at somebody between 50 and 64. I think it's making our industry more attractive. The businesses in our industry that do well, we work with one of our clients who provide after school care. Actually for them, 9% of their workforce are 55 and above, and their oldest employee is 74. And these could be people that have got grandkids themselves. They love, they feel like it keeps them young, working in that environment. But the bonus of that environment is that it's flexible, it's short-term hours, it's flexible contracts, it's not You know, a lot of us have come from that operational background before working in the roles that we're in now, and it's early mornings, it's late shifts, it's 8-hour shifts. The expectation is, you know, every other weekend, or it's very weekend heavy. We're not making all of the roles within our industry available to older adults that might be interested to work but don't want to commit full time to positions. David, you're on mute.
Wow.
That's got to happen.
I'm the
at
first
some point,
one
right?
to do it. Wow. Thanks very much. I was saying what a wonderful response that was, Helen. You couldn't hear it, but I was saying that. Just coming to Helen Tite, following both Colin and Helen Horton's response. There's a role here for well-being in this business. Just focusing for a moment on the leisure sector. How can we improve the well-being in that workplace to make coming to work for, say, this front line of the NHS, the leisure sector, a really valuable place, an attractive place to work?
There's several parts to this, in my opinion. Firstly, in health, we talk about people-centered, and we say it glibly. We say it without actually thinking what that means. So as a 52-year-old woman this morning, I'm trying to dry my hair, and I realised that my shoulders hurt because I was weightlifting last night. Let's have a look what that looks like at 62 when I have arthritis and I can't lift my shoulders, and the idea of working today is not a good day because my mental health is challenged. I'm dealing with a dying relative, and I'm also dealing with children and grandchildren. So we're forgetting about the human factor here. We're talking about, you know, I get it, I hear you, I see how important it is for somebody to work longer and contribute more. But if they're not well and we're not being supported around our health as we age, then straight away we've got an issue. There's also a piece here about lived experience. So I would far rather listen to a 64-year-old Pilates teacher that's delivering in front of me, who's had a hysterectomy and had knee replacement, as a midlife woman, than listen to a, God bless him, 24-year-old young personal trainer who is still starting out on his journey in life. So there is something really valuable about experience and lived experience to help you connect with your very customers. But from the point of the workforce, we need to show that flexibility. We're talking about an aging society, and it's those people that sandwich generation. They need that flexibility around their working hours, and the positive assumption that with this type of person in their 60s, in their 70s, might have medical interventions. So we need to be flexible around it without being fearful around it, because you're right, the bias is there. We don't like employing older people. Older people are complicated. There's insurance that sits with it. It's complex in terms of their needs. Have we got the right insurance? Have we got the right training? Are we doing it the right way? And actually we're losing sight of our common sense when we're working with the older adult. So it's complicated, but it's doable. And if we can just work at one piece at a time, let's scale it back, start at midlife. Let's start working on the midlife population that's soon to be our Gen Xers, moving into their 60s and 70s. They're the ones we need to capture and say, let's talk about prevention and what does that look like and how we can share that forward in the workplace and how we can make a difference that way. So much to do.
Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Helen and Colin. David Sinclair. Oh, sorry, Helen. You wanted to Hels. You wanted to say.
No, I was just going to say, following on, you know, from what Helen was saying about the point of having a, you know, an older, perhaps Pilates instructor or somebody who's got that lived experience. And, you know, we were talking to one of the awarding organisations for things like PT qualifications, and they were saying that 50 to 55-year-olds, that age bracket, actually there's only 3% of people that sign up to do the qualification. So that's 3% that might register to do the qualification. That doesn't then say that they'll complete the qualification and then work in that environment. And I think, you know, working in recruitment now and perhaps previously as an operator, to recruit older instructors is always been a challenge. I know, you know, personally, when my mum was looking for a PT at our local health club, and she was adamant that she wasn't going to have a, you know, young male 20-year-old, because she had, as Helen pointed out, she had a hysterectomy. She wanted somebody that understood the struggles that she had, and there was one older lady as a PT at the centre, and she was fully booked, and so there was actually a waiting list to go and see her, but her clients weren't all ladies in their, you know, late 50s as my mum was then. There are a whole range of people that were training with Nikki at that time.
And to mirror that, it is addressing the needs of the person. You know, you worry that as a deliverer that you're not going to bring your A game because you're not as things are changing, brain fog, and then when these aging processes happen to you, you start to feel that you're not the person you used to be. Imposter syndrome creeps in. You're not capable, you don't have capacity to learn. So we need to rethink around the delivery of training and teaching to an older person. What does that look like? And provide better solutions around the learning model, so they then can complete the training that they're doing. But it's transformational when you see those changes. If you give people the right support to get through the training and get through the other side, start making a difference, because people want that. And I think the pandemic has taught a lot around, what do I do to give something back to society and to be able to make a difference and change people's lives? And that's what leisure does brilliantly. We're very good at motivation. So that's what we want to wholeheartedly change, that approach to learning for the adult learner, the older adult learner.
Thank you very much, David.
Yeah, and perhaps can I come in? I think a couple of observations, and then I think 5 very quick things I think the sector could do. One, look, I think it's worth saying the sector has changed. I remember being a member 15 years ago of one of the big chains that was huge at that time. They were explicitly had an upper age limit. They didn't want older people going. They were explicitly targeting younger people. Actually, what they then realized, and probably led by the hotel chains, was, oh my God, all of a sudden, like, older people are pretty good for filling the daytime slots when we're not busy. So there was a business case for doing it. And to be credit to the industry, I just did a Google image search of trainers, and actually it's no longer 16-year-olds. There's lots of midlife photos in there. The question is, can you have a little bit more towards the older end? But actually, I think you've seen massive progress, whereas 15 years ago it would all have been the 18-year-old female male trainer. So I think things have changed. I think the other thing worth reflecting is older people are passionate about this sector. Older people keep it going. If you think about the Olympics and the London Marathon, frankly, neither of those would survive without older volunteers. They don't exist without older volunteers. So there's a group of people enthusiastic. How do you get them thinking about work rather than being volunteering? And 5 very quick thoughts. Firstly, look at other sectors. If you go to Nando's, you could feasibly become a chief executive. Are there opportunities for progression for people of all ages in the fitness industry? How can you create that? Someone joins you at 50, might be with you at 70. Still, you've got to make sure they have the opportunities. Think about reward. For example, we know that financial reward is less important to older workers than meaningful occupation. So actually making sure your job has purpose and value. Can the sector to do more with older apprenticeships? Is there someone out there willing to really push the older apprenticeships? And I suspect there'd be real interesting opportunities there. I think the diversity points we made, but I would target men as well as women, and actually, yes, there's definitely a group of women who would prefer women, but there's probably a group of women who would also prefer male trainers as well. But actually, I think we do need to, getting some, those retired firemen who retired at 48 into your sector is real opportunities there. And then just to pick up on Helen's point, lifelong learning is so important. And one of the things I think that's really important is that we don't particularly if you've got someone with you for their whole career, you make sure that they don't stop taking the training opportunities from their 40s, because what we know is that the younger people take the training opportunities and the older people don't. So there's an element of, look, we're going to have to force people to keep doing the training into their 50s and 60s, even if they don't want to.
Wonderful, thank you very much. Colin, I just wanted to pick up with you about older persons apprenticeships. Is there a move in and not only I don't want to make this session about leisure, and I'm going to come on to a question for Helen Horton in a minute about other sectors, but I just thought when David mentioned older people's apprenticeships, is that something that's emerging in the sector?
Yeah, I'm going to give you a tangent to that answer if that's okay. What we have learned recently, which was something we didn't know, is that there are a lot more independent operators or sole traders in the sector than we originally thought. So 95,000 organisations who employ people in the sector, and 91% of those employ less than 49 people, and 77% of those, so you're talking close to 60,000 organisations as sole traders. So I think there's something we could do to help people, or help older people understand about operating their own business as well. You don't necessarily need to be employed to work in our sector. There are lots of self-employed opportunities, even within obviously some of the fitness settings. You're still not necessarily an employee of that organisation as well. So I think giving better advice and guidance about the different opportunities for people that want to work for themselves and want to maintain and dictate their own hours as well is something we could do better. But yes, definitely apprenticeships is an untapped resource for the sector on the whole. So as a comparison, the trades generally have between 12 and 15% of their total workforce as apprentices, and we have 0.2. So we need to do something generically around our use of apprenticeships and see where the barriers are for us engaging with those. So yes, then attracting older people into those apprenticeships is an additional challenge for us to look at. I think we need to really unpack what the problems are around apprenticeships before we then start to go, well, actually, can we target a specific demographic around that as well? That's
an astonishing comparison you've just made. So am I right that you said 0.2%? So the sector, the leisure sector, has 0.2% apprenticeships, whereas trades have 12 to 15%.
On average, yeah, they're rough statistics.
What an incredible comparison. Thank you very much for that. I'd just like to move on because I'd like to bring in other sectors to this discussion. So Helen Horton, I know that Love Recruitment specialises in various sectors, including commercial, boutique, independent, supplier, leisure and retail. So are there any sectors that do better than others for attracting older workers, and does this have a noticeable impact on their business?
Hi, David. Yeah, I mean, for us, our main specialism is health and fitness and leisure. So that could be boutique operators within that sector, independent operators, commercial operators. We do support the retail sector, not right across the retail sector, but I would say that retail as a business or as a sector tends to do better than leisure. Businesses such as Next, Sainsbury's, B&Q are a business that's perhaps renowned for their older workforce. Even back in sort of 2011, 30% of their workforce was 50 to 55 and over. In the stores, they bring perhaps a heap of that lived experience and life lessons that they can give. So I think out of us, if you kind of then look at perhaps, I was saying the care sector and that aftercare, they've got 9% of their workforce that are over 55, and they're perhaps one of the higher in our sector. And then you look at, say, B&Q, and not all retail is the same, but certainly those established businesses like that do it better. And it is the reduction in working hours. If you look at the way that they advertise, their adverts are perhaps more inclusive in the language. It's appealing to an older workforce as well.
Brilliant, thank you. Helen Tite, do you notice a difference in sectors who invest in wellness within their business, and whether that reflects any of what Helen just said about which sectors are particularly stronger in more diversity or reflecting society.
I think there's a piece around what well-being means. Well-being to some are yoga pants, hugging trees in lovely studios. Well-being to others is making sure somebody's health is managed correctly in the workforce. So that title, well-being in itself, is really ambiguous. Those companies that invest and have well-being budgets, because that's the next part. There's training budgets, there's learning and development budgets, but are there budgets for well-being? And what category does that mean, in spite of the ripple effect of somebody's health and well-being? So there's those pieces there as well. What we're finding, some sectors, so family-run businesses are less likely to invest in health and well-being. So we tend to target companies and organisations that have directors of people. So they have people in the hearts. We also consider B Corps and working towards the B Corp organisations because they're planet and people. So we've got to get the people bit right first. If we can make sure their wellness, then the service delivery, whatever that is, whatever sector it is, you will see an improvement, because people will feel valued and they will feel that you are making an effort to care for their health, for their well-being, and therefore they will give you more of themselves. It doesn't matter which sector that's in.
Thanks, Helen. I've got a question for you, but I just wondered, before I ask it, could you just explain what B Corp is?
So the B Corp movement started with organisations like Patagonia. So they have profit. With their profit, they can do good with it. It starts at the heart of the people, the workforce they employ. It is about changing their environmental impact, environmental footprint, and they do good with the money they earn. And it's rippling out through many organisations globally. It's becoming quite a movement now. But I get them. They are the people that I want to work with, because they understand humans, and they understand living longer, better. They understand being well. And if you've got a well and supported and positive workforce, everything else starts to fall in. Well, not everything, but in the perfect world, it all starts to fall into place.
It's a good starting point, isn't it,
Yeah.
Helen? Yes. I'd just like to come to you, Helen Tite, with a question that I particularly wanted to ask you, which was, so the iCareiMove vision is to embed wellness, and you're quite right that we need to understand what that really means. So it's to embed that into businesses, with people at the heart of your programs, and particularly focusing on our aging society.
Mm-hmm.
Is there evidence to suggest that investing in workplace wellness provides a return on investment, for example, through greater retention, particularly for older workers? Or did companies who made this investment pre-pandemic have greater success in their older workers returning after COVID?
Yes, is the answer. So the question is around, firstly, is it worth investing in wellbeing in the workforce? The answer is 100% yes, on every scale, whether it's flexible working, or understanding health better, having conversations with a partner or a work colleague who may have had a stroke, or somebody else who's dealing with cancer. Just having conversations with your workforce to support them better. The investment, often it's subtle. Wellbeing is subtle, as we all know. It's not instant. It is about drip feeding knowledge and education into your workforce to improve happiness. And happiness again is an ambiguous. It's fluffy. It's woolly. It's vague. All those things that we don't actually take seriously, but it all sits in those soft skills. Now, we can train people, but actually empathy and soft skills are really part and parcel of again, humanity. Understanding people, understanding what's going on in people's lives will help for a better workforce. Investment before pandemic, I think we're in different worlds now, mostly around making those work-life changes. We still don't fully appreciate the impact of the pandemic on grief and loss, on work-life balances, midlife people having to walk away from the workforce because they're supporting children. We also don't fully understand the impact of having COVID on your long-term health as well. So it's very difficult. In my world, I seem to go, before pandemic, that was a different life. Now we see life through different lens. Now we have to look after ourselves. We also have to pour from an empty, you can't pour from an empty cup. You have to look at yourself. And where does it start? It starts with us. Look after your own health first, and that will ripple out to the people that you love in your life, in your work or outside of the workforce.
Such an important point, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes,
I was just going to say,
David,
can I just come out? I really interesting one. Given the point earlier about small organisations in the leisure sector, for example, one thing that's worth reflecting on is there's very little support out there for small businesses in this space. So, you know, I've as a charity with 12 members of staff, I've fortunately have access to chat to friends at places like Mercer and things like that. And seriously, there is no support for small organisations. What you get back is you should do some steps, to have a step competition, or download this mental health leaflet. So I think there's something like that. I push a bit more though on responsibility in terms of moving the social norm here. Look, actually what we've done with older workers and work generally is we're killing with kindness. What we're doing is telling people, look, there's a lift, you can use that instead. Or look, the water's right in your office, you can use that. Basically, good practice in terms of older workers is deemed to be making production lines easier. No, make them harder. What we need to be doing is making sure that what we've done is designed out physical activity from work and from travel to work. You know, you also need to make sure that, you know, leisure is one of the worst for having huge car parking bases. You know, making sure that you're not you're encouraging active travel for workers, you're disincentivizing people from driving. You know, as employers, you've got to play a part in recognizing that the biggest factor is the environment. And actually, you know, we're really rubbish at this because frankly, we're all a bit lazy and we prefer to drive. And I think there's a responsibility for all of us to tackle that killing with kindness thing, because we're not going to be healthy to work longer if we aren't forced up the stairs when in our 40s.
Thank you, and I agree with the point about design as well. I think I heard you speak, David, on a webinar a few weeks or a month or two ago about appropriate design and not making the lift more convenient than the stairs and so on. I just wanted to pick up on one of Helen Tite's points earlier about how smaller independent boutique businesses can help us achieve this mission. And I know, Colin, you mentioned the role of the growing number of particularly in the leisure sector, about how many independent and boutique gyms, sort of self-employed people there are. Do you think we can have a greater impact by focusing on those as well, rather than just thinking about larger organizations who might be harder to shift?
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Helen, was that for you or for me?
I'm not sure. Is it for me?
Yes, I wanted to ask the question to Colin, but I'll gladly come back to Helen
that's
Tite
okay.
afterwards.
Colin, you go first.
Yeah.
Thanks, Helen. No worries. Yeah, there's a bit of a butterfly effect with that. So I was really interested in what Helen was saying about value and recognition. So what we hear is that people want to be valued and recognition. That's a big part of why they leave the sector. And what we then jump to responding to is providing people with Costa Coffee vouchers and things like that. But that's not actually what they want in terms of value and recognition. They want to feel wanted and loved and part of an organisation. But the trouble is that obviously we do have a lot of small independent operators and people that employ less than 10 people. And about 70% of them are still in startup mode. So they aren't mature businesses. So to ask them to do things that we might expect our own businesses to do that are a bit more mature in terms of looking after and retaining our people is quite a challenge for them when they're just trying to get established at that point as well. So we're definitely looking at how we can step into that space and provide more support for those independent organisations. We've just invested into 14 local skills delivery managers who will be bringing organisations together at a local level to develop their local skills plans, which aligns to the new government agenda of post-16 skills and education bill around devolution and making sure that skills funding is prioritised locally, and the funding is given to the right areas. So that's hopefully going to have a bit of an impact in terms of government and policymakers understanding what our sector needs. So we can therefore effectively lobby for investment and into our people. So those businesses that are in startup mode and are struggling can be provided with an off the shelf support package, if you like. So therefore, it's less challenging for them to go and source funding to support their people. Actually, it's readily available, and there are training programs that are easily accessible where we can market and land them in their inboxes rather than having to go seek those things out. So I think some of the things that we could do aren't necessarily complicated in terms of people. Small businesses just need to be provided with some support and know where to get it and know where to get it easily. The complicated bit is making sure we've got the investment and the policies in place to make sure the right things are landing with the right people at the right time. Which requires coordination, not just from CIMSPA, but a whole host of national and local and regional organisations to make that happen.
I think that there's also a piece here around, often it is that group exercise fan is interested on training. She wants to become a personal trainer. She goes through that process. Before she know it, she's got a studio and then a health club. Nowhere on that journey somebody has told her the benefits of being a CIC over a limited company. She goes down the route of being a limited company. Now she's not accessible to funding because she's a limited company making profit out of people's disease, not actually helping the community, which is an irony in itself. There's no training on that journey around how to write for bids, how to find source funding when you're not actually making it up yourself. So stronger together, collaborative work, finding other small startups, young organisations, finding mentors who were there 3 years ago that can help hold their hands and take them on that journey. They wouldn't necessarily go to someone like CIMSPA, for example, because they just don't know what they don't know. So that information isn't used out of the training organisations at the very beginning of the journey. So, it's not just getting up and teach exercise and go to bed. It's complex being a business owner in an industry where money is in abundance for some and it's not there for others. And this is when you draw on your communities to help those people who may not be working but were once bank managers, or were once bid writers, or were once copywriters and designers, and throwing yourself on the sword to say, you're older, you're retired, help me grow my business. You love my business so much, help me. There's a piece around that too. And I think those are the organisations that still aren't being heard in leisure, because there are hundreds of us that have gone through that journey and stand to tell this tale today.
Thanks very much. I have just coming back to when David mentioned the flexible working bill earlier, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. It's not necessarily a question. But I saw an article, in fact, our managing director pointed it out to me a few days ago. There was an article online called "Pubs and Restaurants Need Older Workers to Help Fill 150,000 Vacancies." So the co-founder of a startup school for seniors said, nothing will change if we don't do something different. And you've all helped us to understand that what could be done differently. And I think the theme that I'm getting from this, from your contributions today, is that it needs coordinating. There are lots of good ideas around, but something has to be coordinated. And the co-founder of Startup School for Seniors said, people aged 50 plus are seeking work to accommodate their complex lives, just as you said earlier. They want flexibility, the opportunity to work remotely and to be able to juggle caring for others or their own health and mobility issues. And employers working in retail and hospitality needs to find ways to facilitate that, whether through job sharing, flexible working hours, or additional perks such as a physio or free gym passes to deal with the stresses of working on their feet all day. Otherwise, I suggest this is the co-founder. She suggests that they stop creating surveys and press releases to take up column inches that would be better spent on real news. And David, and I think she's probably got a point there.
Yeah, I think one of the, just coming back to the where you started, clearly the nighttime people involved in the nighttime economy are pretty as bad in dealing and supporting older workers as they are with older customers. Frankly, it's a sector that massively misses out on the fact that an increasing proportion of us are old. Our cities are dying because we're failing to adapt the nighttime economy to what we want as we age. And workforce wise, even things like how do you get back from if you're working the late shift at the pub or things like that, all these practical things that sector needs to think about. One thing I'd just pick up on is just be a bit careful. We should be a bit careful about the sort of it's all really physically hard, because one of the arguments against old workers, it's all very physically hard. Yeah, let's not forget that in the 60s, a higher proportion of men were working when the jobs were a lot more physically hard than they are today. They might be mentally more difficult, and there may be that, but actually, let's also not forget that today, a lot of older workers are actually in physically tough jobs. So 3 in 10 farmers are over 65, and the average age is 65. Half of all heavy goods workers are over 50. The reality, carers leans very heavily towards older workers. Education actually surprisingly does as well. So I think we just need to be a bit careful about not sort of equating older work with physically demanding, physically difficult, because frankly my 50-year-old park runner who who is about 10 or 11 minutes quicker than me around the course, who's the ex-fireman, is so much, I think we need to reflect that there are some very, very fit and healthy people in their 50s, 60s and 70s.
That's a very good point. Helen Horton, I presume, would you like to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree. It's not, all of the roles are physically demanding. Perhaps, in as David said, a lot less physically demanding than they were. So it is, I think, across what we need to do is that collaboration. It's not just a one thing fits all for everybody. It's looking at those steps that we can do to kind of it's not going to be solved tomorrow. It's that Rome wasn't built in a day, but it is important to kind of start taking those steps, and for businesses to kind of look at what they're doing for the older workforce. I say, speaking to some of our clients, I said, what challenges do you have with some of your older workforce, perhaps in what you're doing? Some of that could be technology. Some of the guys they're working in remote shifts, so providing after school care. A lot of that is signed in through an app on their smartphones. They then had to adapt that process to their older workforce that didn't have a smartphone, so there was a different way for them to still kind of go through that process and be inclusive, even though their use of the technology wasn't the same. So how can they still get the same results but tweak it in a different way? So I think it's some of those thoughts of adaptations are also required. And that's not to say that not all older adults can't use technology. I'm terrible, myself. So, and I learn from my little nephews. So, but there are certain things that might be happening that workforces also need to take into consideration.
Yeah, indeed. Thank you.
David, can I just interject, just to give you the heads up that it's 2 to 3, and obviously I'm conscious that there might be some questions coming in, so just to let you know on the time.
Well, thank you, Laura. I was just about to come to Liz Murray's question because I was interested in what Colin thought about this. Liz Murray from the fantastic iCan Therapy Centre, she said that going back to the conversation about leisure recruitment, I wonder, and this could apply to different sectors as well, I wonder then, when considering recruitment, advertising should focus on lived experience as an essential skill, in addition to qualifications and training, as well as promoting flexible working as an employee benefit. I just wondered what your thoughts on that were, Colin.
Yeah, Liz read my mind. It's exactly the last point I wanted to finish on, in terms of the skills that employers are looking for, not necessarily the technical skills around the particular job. They're looking for a lot of the things that old people have. So we've done hundreds of skills diagnostics with local employers recently to understand what their wants and needs are. And we were expecting them to say, oh, we need lifeguards, we need swimming teachers, we need personal trainers, we need fitness instructors. And they didn't. They said, we need people that can engage with their community. We need people that can communicate with my customers. We need people that understand the people that are coming through the door, understand the health conditions that they may have, and how the adaptations that they may need to make as a result, things like that. So they were the top 3 things that came out. Whereas we were thinking, oh, it's going to say lifeguard. So yeah, but what then you see is a disconnect between that and then the job advert. So the job advert says you must have a level 3 personal training qualification or level 2 MPLQ qualification for a lifeguard. You can train that, you can teach that. You get the right person in the building, give them the technical skills to build on from there.
Can I just come in on that, because I think it's a really interesting point, though. Yeah, we work with some actuarial consultants in a sector. You think, oh, they're going to want people who've got maths degrees and higher level actuarial consultancy. Interestingly, one of them was telling me recently that frankly they love maths geeks. They don't need someone who's got. If you're numerate and you never did a degree, but actually you're and there's a lot of around COVID people who are doing their own analysis and were brilliant at maths, and actually the consultancy was like, we love these people. So there's something about actually, and for example, we never now at ILC, we would never say X years experience. We would never say specific. I think blind recruitment. You should all be using blind recruitment panels there, and AI makes it a bit more difficult. But there's some really interesting ways that actually you make things a little bit. That I think what's key is focusing on what you actually need for the job, and as Colin said, can you train X and Y? Are you really buying someone who has good empathy skills and actually you can teach the technical stuff, and if so, how do you advertise for that?
Fabulous. Thank you, David. In the final minute of our fabulous webinar, and I would like to reiterate my thanks to you all for attending, and also to our amazing panel for their insight and experience. I worried that we didn't have enough questions, but we've got loads left. But I'd like to ask my final question in a very quick fire round, as quickly as you can, please. What would you conclude we should do to change this situation, or is it up to government or someone else? And what does this mean for your organisation? Can I start with Helen Horton, please?
I'd say the government have certainly got a role to play, but I'd say it's more collaboration between different sectors within the industry.
Brilliantly short answer. Thank you very much, Colin.
Value the skills of older people, all of us, collectively.
Great. Helen Tite.
Remember, people at the heart of everything we do. Wonderful.
Thank you. And David Sinclair.
Great. And I'm going to be slightly longer. My organisation had 10 staff until recently. We had staff in our 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. If we can do it, so can anyone else. Focus on prevention. Yes, government needs to spend it, but so do employers need to focus on it. If we keep people healthier, they work longer, they volunteer more, they spend more, and they care more. There's absolutely a case for employers doing that. And then final sort of observation. I think for the sectors listening, I'd focus a bit less on the supply side. There's a lot of obsession with why older workers don't want to work for us. Actually focus on the demand side. How do you create the jobs that people want to do? So think about it from the other point of view. And if you do that, frankly, people will come and work for you. It's why they go and volunteer at the Olympics and the marathon.
That is such a good point to end on, David. Thank you. Thank you to Colin, to Helen, to Hels, and to David Sinclair for all your wonderful contributions. Thank you to the Innerva team for keeping me going and on track in the background, and to you all for attending our webinar. And we hope to see you next time. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.